So in the last few days and weeks, you will have noticed that there's been a new spike in Islamist terrorism in the West, in Western countries. And Douglas Murray thinks this is not quite by chance. And he connects what he thinks has been growing tolerance that we've seen over the last year for the viciously anti-Israel, which is implicitly and frankly explicitly in support of Hamas. And when they talk about intifada, that's direct terrorism. And he says there's a clear link between the two of these things. And I want to read to you his words in the New York Post, where he tries to connect the dots. He says, from college campuses to Afghanistan, we let Islamic terrorism rise again. These are Douglas's words. He said, let's all give a big shout out to the Globalize the Intifada crowd. You got your way. Congratulations. I hope it feels good. For years, citizens of Israel have had maniac jihadists driving at them and trying to mow them down on their streets. But this got only cheers from the dolts on US college campuses and New York street protesters. Then just before Christmas, Germany again got a taste of this intifada. That was when a Saudi immigrant decided to plough a vehicle through a previously happy Christmas market. He killed 5 people and injured almost 200. Then on New Year's Eve, it was America's turn, again. This time, the wishes of the students at Columbia and other college campuses arrived on the streets of New Orleans. A man carrying an ISIS flag drove a pickup through New Year's revelers, which you can see in this picture over here, killing 14 people and seriously injuring dozens more. The FBI is looking into his network of contacts. There are several things to say about all this. The first is that although many people hoped the threat of jihadist violence had diminished, it has not gone away. With jihadist groups running Afghanistan and Syria, among other countries, they are back in control of vast areas as they were before 9/11. After the 2001 attacks on this city, America vowed there should be no safe haven for terrorists. That included ungoverned or Islamist-governed spaces abroad where terrorists can be trained and then come to the United States and other Western countries and carry out attacks. Such spaces were indeed reduced by US and Allied forces in the years that followed, but they have come back. Today, Afghanistan, Syria and Yemen, to name just 3 countries, are places where jihadists can train and learn battlefield tactics. Our intelligence agencies and military need to keep a close eye on these places and strike when needed. The second thing is that it's obvious that a considerable campaign of recruitment inside the United States is still ongoing. The New Orleans terrorists appears to have been radicalized while in the United States. Whether that was online or via a network within the US will soon be learned. But we should hope that the full force of the law and law enforcement agencies comes down on any and all such groupings. Many in the intelligence community and the police are indeed working hard on such cases, but there is a societal torpor about this work. If the New Year's Eve attack had not been jihadist, but had, for instance, been some far-right white supremacist, every corner of our media and politics would be rightly lining up to demand answers. We'd be asking who the people were who had put such a person up to such an attack. Who had helped him? Who had encouraged him? Who had said it was all right, in fact good, to do such a thing? Even after almost a quarter of a century, it is still different with jihadists. There are too many people who think that there are cultural sensitivities that have to be respected. People talk about making sure that whole communities are rightly not smeared by association. Yet if people are worried about guilt by association, why not cut that out by being very clear indeed about the sort of people, including Muslims, who do in fact encourage terrorism? Take the most prominent Muslim group in the United States, the Council on American Islamic Relations. As well as being an unindicted co-conspirator in past terrorism cases, CAIR's leadership is still full of people who are not anti-terror, but actually pro-terror. It is quite an achievement, if you think about it, to lead a Muslim American organization and praise terrorism only to then complain that too many people conflate Muslims and terrorism. Ever think you're part of the problem, guys? Here is what CAIR's current executive director, Nihad Awad, said after October 7th. Using completely untrue and offensive language, Awad told an audience, the people of Gaza only decided to break the siege, the walls of the concentration camp, on October 7th. And yes, I was happy to see people breaking the siege. He went to describe this breaking the siege of Gaza as though on that day Palestinians simply walked happily through their ancestral lands. He forgot to mention the more salient points: the raping, beheading, the burning people alive, and kidnapping of children. Just as worryingly, his large Muslim audience applauded his statements. The fact that there isn't more outrage about groups like CARE and people like Awad is because they are not as rare as we might wish, and there is too little wider societal courage to call these people out. It's the same here in New York. On New Year's Day, as the bodies were still being collected on the streets of New Orleans, there was a pro-terrorist protest here in the heart of New York. Yes, you read that right. On New Year's Day, hundreds of people gathered in Times Square. The protest was organised by the Palestinian Youth Movement, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and the People's Forum, as well as participants screaming at Jews that they should go back to Europe. These protesters also chanted continuously for jihad. There is only one solution, they chanted: Intifada revolution. How do these events even go ahead? And when will Americans rise up against the sort of people who support terrorism on our streets? Douglas is right, by the way. We've just completely normalised this, but it's madness. This should not be normal. Again, if there was some vast rally of the KKK, hardly the most active group these days, where people praised a white supremacist hours after he had struck, and told black Americans, for instance, to go to some other country, there'd be zero tolerance for such people. Not only would the police step in, but I suspect incensed members of the public would do so as well. So why are we so craven while people on the streets and campuses of this city actually call for terrorism, while the citizens in New Orleans have just suffered it? It's a question that needs answering, and there should be a vast reservoir of horror, rage and disgust aimed at Americans who celebrate terror even as their fellow citizens are suffering it. Douglas's words, as ever, are so poignant, and this, I think part of the root of the issue here that we really need to look at some point more deeply is why all this is going on. Because on the one hand, we're seeing the battle between Islamic extremism, religious fundamentalism, and then a very secular West. And they're both in loggerhorns fighting each other, ready to, smite the other and get rid of them. How do we resolve this? Some say, well, the only solution is one side has to win, the other side has to lose. The problem is, it seems that neither option really are creating optimal outcomes. Certainly on the religious extremist side, you don't need me to tell you that the Islamic world is hardly the most flourishing, balanced, happy, growing, just stable society by and large. And we know that religious extremism leads to violence, it leads to things that are anti-life and ungodly, by the way. But on the other hand, secularism in the West is also seeming to fail. It's leading to all kinds of deep societal problems, divide, dysfunction, lack of morality. So what's interesting is that actually now is the time for the Jewish people to come into their role, to be who they were charged with being 3,000 years ago, which is to be that voice of God's morality, to be the vessel through which that's brought into the world. Because God actually has, in his Torah, the perfect answers, perfect balance to all the kind of questions that we see debates. If you're looking for meaning, but also want to be engaged with the world, if you're looking for modesty, but also don't want to, not have any human expression, if you're looking for a religious connection, but also want to live a normal day-to-day life, on all these matters, Torah has so much wisdom, so much balance. I mean, even, for example, on the issue of, let's say, a massive issue that you've seen between people who are very deeply religious versus very deeply secular. Abortion. There actually, Torah is not in either camp entirely, the pro-life or the pro-choice. It's funny, who isn't pro-life? Who isn't pro-choice? It's clever how they frame these. Torah actually has a balanced approach to this, which says that certainly in the early stages, the baby in the womb is not the same in terms of the quality of the value of the life as the mother, as a child that's born. On the other hand, it is still a precious being of infinite value. And we absolutely should not take lightly the notion of having an abortion. It also prohibits abortions taking space in the later stages. So it strikes a balance between saying if there's strong, let's say, threat to the mother's life, it could be physical, mental, all kinds of things. But if it's really, really thought through, there is some room for that. But on the other hand, it says the room is pretty small and there needs to be a very, very, very strong case for this. And this is not something that can just be done on a whim. And, we don't want to create a society that encourages that. So Torah actually kind of strikes a healthy balance. And as I'm saying, on so many of these issues where there are great societal battles and divides, it often creates a healthy, fair, meaningful path that can really address many of the concerns. Sometimes, by the way, it will come down strongly on one side of an issue and not the other. But my point is that both sides of the debate, the secular side and the deeply religious side, are both expressing valid concerns. One side says, I want to express myself, I want to experience the world, want to be worldly, and I value physical comforts and materialism as part of a stable, healthy, happy life. The other side says, no, we've got to be completely focused on spirituality, and that is the only way to find meaning in our life. And Torah actually says we can find a balance between the two. In fact, we can find a synthesis of the two. That engaging in the world, but making sure that we connect to everything and uplift it, elevate it for godly purposes. That's the way you really can do both. And I think that might be what informs the Star of David, which shows it's going in two directions, right? From heaven downwards and earth upward. Because that's what Torah is trying to give us. A way to bring us upward and bring heaven downward and synthesize everything with God, the physical world, humanity. So I think that's why it's important that we get out Jewish messages and Jewish ideas, because the world is really hungry for it. I think it's no accident that God has engineered the times we're in today, that the world's magnifying glass is on Israel and the Jewish people. There's a reason for that, because God is handing the Jewish people the microphone to fully and finally come into their role. Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.